I'd like to dedicate today's Devar Torah in the memory of a woman whose name was Shifra Harwitz. Um, I did not know her personally. I first learned her name this morning when I read a little bit about her story, that from what I understand, she was a victim of Chaim Walder's abuse. And after he had committed suicide and had this hero's funeral with great eulogies and uh, people continue to question, doubt, and defame the victims and hail him as some sort of tzaddik, it became too much for her. She couldn't handle it, and she ended her life. And this reminds me very much of our parsha and a point that I think needs to be looked at, and hopefully we can learn something. And that is when Moshe came to the Jewish nation and told them that God sent him to redeem them, to take them out, and show them the signs and the wonders. They believed him. They believed that this was the end of their suffering, the beginning of a new life, and that they were going to have some healing. And then when Moshe went to Paro and told him to let the people go, and Paro said, well, who is this God? I've never heard of him. I don't know him. And he increased their burden and he made them work harder and to make their own bricks from straw. And then they had to find their own straw to make bricks and basically make something out of nothing, to build something out of nothing. And then when Moshe went to tell them further information about their redemption, as said by God, they couldn't hear him. It says they could not hear him. They didn't listen because of kotzer ruach, shortness of breath. They lost their will. They lost anything that they had, and they just couldn't hear anything about a future that was going to be good for them. And I think that this is what happened to Shifra and what happens to the victims of Chaim Walder, because when the news first broke and story upon story came out and people started not selling, the big stores not selling his books, and there looked like there was going to be a trial, and they were going to start to get some form of justice, a beginning to healing for them. And they're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But then what he did was he committed suicide. And I want to tell you, his suicide, in case anyone has the notion that there's some sort of moral equivalency and we can say her suicide, his suicide, they both couldn't. No, I'm sorry. His suicide was an act of control. First of all, abusers are all about control and manipulation. And his act of suicide was a further act of manipulation. He left a suicide note saying what he wanted to say. He didn't want to go under trial. He didn't want to have to hear the stories of things that he did. He wanted to silence his abusers, his victims, and he called this he told us what he wanted us to think. This is a world of sheker, he says, a world of lies. And you know why it's a world of lies? It's because of people like him that pretend to be one thing and do another. And I don't want to say that, people say, okay, some people are good people and do bad things. And yes, that's the truth, that's the case. But what he was doing here when he was confronted with what he did, he further lied and covered up and took his own life. She took her own life because she was in so much pain and so much suffering. And he pushed her over the edge. I believe that he took his own life as a form of control. He wanted to say what he wanted to see, leave the legacy that he wants to leave his name untainted and to further silence his victims. And the abuse goes on because the abuse was so much so even from his death that it caused her death and potentially so much harm in the future. And what he did was see himself, and if you look at the note, he ends off the note, his suicide note, with Hashem Natan v'Hashem Lakach. It's a famous thing that people say when somebody dies, that God gives us life and God takes life. And to say this is such a perversion of the ultimate truth. God gives us life. Yes, he does. God gave him a life to do good, which he started to do. And he had an opportunity with God continuing to give him life to do tshuva, to turn around, to confess his sins, to make some sort of reparations, to try maybe and heal and give some sort of good message and help other people heal, not just his abusers, maybe people, other sick people. So much he could have done. But you know what he did? He lakach. Okay, Chaim lakach his own Chaim. Chaim took his own life. God did not take his life. He took his own life. And he, for him to say, Hashem Natan, Hashem lakach, Hashem lakach, what are you, Hashem? Chaim, you lakach, you took your life. And he was, in essence, making himself a god, like Paro. That's what I'm trying to say. I know this sounds very harsh, but Paro, when he said, Mi Hashem, who is God? Because Paro pretended to be a god himself. And you know what? God wanted the truth to be shown. He told Moshe, go in the morning, because in the morning, Paro relieves himself in the Nile. He pretends to be a god, but he goes to the bathroom like everyone else. Catch him in it and show him that we know he's not a god. We know he's not a god. And Chaim also, he puts himself as tzaddik and says, I'm going to be the voice of the people, right? Children speak. He's supposed to be the voice of the people. But when no one was looking, when no one is around, early in the morning behind closed doors, he was the abuser. He was the person who silenced the people. He says he's letting them speak, but he took from them. He took from their dignity. He took things that can never give back. And then he makes it like he's the one who's letting them speak and heal. And that is just, it's just despicable to claim to be one thing and to do the exact opposite. To do the exact opposite. And if he was a weak person and had a problem, then stay alive, own up to it, do a tshuva. It's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's very hard. But what I'm saying is, at this point, when he took his life, if we don't continue to speak out against it, if we don't continue to let the women speak, I hope that more people will come forward and write, and we can have some sort of support system for them. We can start to demand better from our leaders. We say we will not put up with abuse. As soon as there's abuse, yes, people have problems. They try to make it out like Chaim was just someone who had adulterous affairs, and then the women were culpable also. There's so many things I have to say about that. First of all, he was, the people that came out, there were children, 12, 15. These were not women that were consensual adults. And even if you're going to tell me about the adulteries and you're going to blame the women also, in the Haredi, in the more religious right-wing communities, women are brought up to understand that we have to listen, the women have to listen to the men. We're taught to be submissive. We're taught to listen to these, especially leader type people like Chaim. You don't question, you don't speak out against. And anyways, who's going to believe you? The manipulation was something that they didn't have power. They were powerless, like power to the people. They were powerless in his hands. And so there is no way to justify anything that he did. And we have to say that we will not put up with it. Any leader that abuses gets called down from leadership. That is not someone who should be writing books, influencing people. And we have to now pick up the pieces before the rest of the victims from their kotzer ruach say that this is the end now. We can't, they have more pain and suffering and guilt upon guilt. We have to tell them, no, this death is not your fault. He didn't have to abuse. He didn't have to take his own life. Your speaking out was to do the justice. Justice has to be done. And you should continue. You help people. You should help yourself heal. We should support them. And we should learn from this and start to do some sort of cleaning out the garbage. Any leaders that are guilty should not be in leadership positions. And people that support them, we don't support. And let's begin the healing. Let's support these women and hopefully make a better future with better morals and better values and not cover ups. Shabbat Shalom.